Hey, kia ora everyone, welcome. Ko Frian Wadia Toko Ingoa. We're really glad to have Andrea Greer today with us and Karllie Clifton joining as our guest for the korero. I will get us underway with the with the karakia te matanga and then get going with our korero for today. So, karakia te matanga. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. Ehi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, taihi e Māori ora. Kia ora and welcome.
Kia
So,
ora.
Andrea, welcome. I have known you for a few years now.
Yeah.
I believe you've started your journey as a social worker and then moving into the space of neuroscience and trauma-informed practice in the social work space. And I remember attending your workshop many years ago, and I was really blown away with the framework that you developed.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
the perspectives you had shared. So, and you've grown so much since then. You've started off with your own consultancy, and you've been working in the community so much. So we're really delighted to have you, and we would love to hear a bit more you. And before we get on to a bit more introduction from you, I would like to introduce Karllie Clifton as well. So Karllie has been an educator for many years now. Karlie's worked in the secondary school space and across adult education as well, isn't it, Karllie, for a bit? And you've done lots of traveling. You've worked with youth, which is again another space where we really do need more understanding about, trauma-informed approaches. And you've also been teaching te reo Māori, isn't it, Karllie, for a while? And so it's really interesting to talk a little bit later about that aspect as well, how you have woven, your understanding of te ao Māori, the use of te reo into the Western sort of worldview of neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches as well. But most importantly, you've also studied recently and done a literature review, which you've very kindly shared with everyone. And I know I've had feedback from people saying it's been really useful and really helpful. So that's fabulous. So on to you, ladies. Andrea, did you want to start us off and just share a bit more about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and what has got you really interested in this space?
Awesome. I'll begin with my PPH, if that's okay. So,
Yes,
tēnā
absolutely.
koutou katoa, ko Bukit Timahill tōku monga, ko Singapore River tōku awa, no Singapore aho, ko Andrea Greer tōku ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So thank you, ngā mihi, Frian, for this invitation. I hope I'll be thanking you after this webinar as well. But yeah, it's such a great honor to be here and to just really share my heart and passion. And Karllie, I'm just so looking forward to, I've heard lots of good things about you. So just really, leaning off and can't wait for your part to kick off as well. So as I mentioned in my PPH, I'm originally from Singapore City. And if you've ever been to Singapore, Singapore is the size of Lake Taupo, and it's got 5 million people in that size, and it's very hot and humid, and Singaporeans love two favorite pastimes, and that is eating and shopping. So that's me. I love eating and I love shopping. And ironically now I live in sunny Southland in New Zealand. It was sunny today, although it was 2 degrees Celsius, but it was still sunny. And we had a bit of a frost. So, life has ironies, and never expected to migrate over to Aotearoa, New Zealand. But now it is my home. And, I'm so privileged to live here in this beautiful country and raise my 2 beautiful daughters as well in this country. So my professional background, I'm a registered social worker. And I have practiced in Aotearoa, New Zealand for 18 years. And I've really been always been in the children and youth space. So just really love working with young people, just love the energy. I love being creative with them. So that is, you know, kind of like, it's always been the area of, I guess, my passion and, you know, specialty to work with children and youth. So that's a little bit of my professional background. Is there anything else, Brian, that you want to know?
No, look, maybe later on you can start talking a bit more about how you got into this space, what got you interested in the, neuroscience and trauma-informed space. But no, look, thank you. It's a huge change, isn't it, from Singapore, the humidity, the warmth to Southland.
Yeah.
But one of the things, Andrea, I know you have um, embraced the New Zealand culture and the diversity so beautifully, and you have always been so mindful of making sure that you are sort of upholding the the Te o Waitangi, obligations as someone who's come into the country. It's beautiful. I know as somebody who's migrated myself, when I first came, I used to struggle and I used to actually think, what can I do? And I used to always think um, that I was inadequate in that space. And yeah, I've sort of, it's been a journey for me to learn bits of
Absolutely.
korero and, simple little things like doing the karakia. But yeah, I've always noticed you've done it so beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to honor, the beautiful Maori culture that we have in this country and honor Maori as being Tanata Whenua. I think it's so, so important. Yeah.
You've done it beautifully.
Oh,
At
thank
least I
you.
think so. So look, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Karllie, kia ora and welcome. Thank you for making the time to come along. You've just blown me away. I've actually managed to meet you in person. Andrea, we've always met online, and Karllie, I've actually met once in person. I'm all blown
Oh,
away with how much she's done, how much she's packed into her life. I love that, the richness of everything you've done, Karllie. So thank you for coming along. Look, would you like to introduce yourself and share a bit about yourself?
Tēnā koe, Brian. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui ki te tauhou Māori, o Waio, i te taha toku mama, ko Ngāpui toku iwi, ki te taha toku pāpā, ko Te Atiawa toku iwi. I tipu ahau ki te moana a toi, no Tāmaki Makaurau toku kāinga naine, ko Karllie toku ingoa. So I just want to thank you, Frian, for this opportunity to be here tonight. And hello, everyone. And I did just say Happy New Year. Although we haven't seen Mātariki yet, we are in the first month of the Māori calendar, Piripi, with the new moon that came on Friday, I think it was, Pero. So, yeah, I guess, yeah, we're kind of in the new year. We're just waiting to celebrate once we get to see Mātariki. So you might see I've got my own little Mātariki going on behind me with some stars up there. Yeah, so I am Māori. On my mum's side, I whakapapa to Northland, Ngāpui up north. And on my dad's side, Te Atiawa, which stretches from Taranaki down to the top of the South Island. But yeah, the top of the South Island is where I whakapapa to. In saying that, I grew up in the Bay of Plenty, which I refer to as Te Moana a Toi, the ocean of Toi down there, and I currently live in Auckland. So yeah, my time in education has been over 20 plus years now. So I started teaching, high school teaching in 2003 in Hamilton at Hillcrest High School. Spent 13 years teaching there and 9 years of that as a dean. But yeah, I did a lot in that time. I coached volleyball for a long time, involved in outdoor education, spent a lot of time on Great Barrier Island with Hillary Outdoors. But yeah, a big passion of mine was Māori achievement For personal reasons, and mainstream education is a really hard space for our Māori students. So yeah, 13 years teaching, a lot of time obviously in that pastoral space, and supporting students, which I guess I could say is probably where this interest began. Then left Hillcrest in 2015, did a lot of traveling and packed a lot of stuff in, like Freon said, and then came back to education and went teaching, or actually spent a little time at a Portuguese college down in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and then moved into teacher training, mentoring training teachers from the Coromandel through the Bay of Plenty, and continued my work in outdoor education with Hillary Outdoors out on Great Barrier Island, still connected to Hillcrest High School. That's there. But currently, coming up 3 years, I've now been managing a boarding hostel for girls, Māori and Pacifica girls, in central Auckland. We're called In-Zone Education. So we provide boarding specifically to Māori and Pacifica rangatahi, and that allows them to attend my girls attend Epsom Girls Grammar and our boys Auckland Grammar. So that has been, a pretty interesting 3 years, being out of the classroom. But just this year, I have gone back into the classroom at Epsom Girls, teaching Reo Māori, as Brown said. I'm not a fluent speaker. I am still very much learning language is always a learning journey, but yeah, I'm not quite yet conversational, but I feel Māori is not hard. I can get by with the junior classes. So yeah, so it's been fun. It's been good for my learning journey, being back in the classroom as a language teacher, because my subject's actually digital technology. That's what I was trying to teach. Yeah, but I'm about to transition into something else. What that is, I do not know yet. There's things in the works. I have options. But yeah, I'm finishing up at In-Zone. I'll continue relief teaching at Epsom Girls until plans fall into place, I guess. So I'm in a bit of a transition journey at the moment as I move out of boarding and back into, it'll be education somewhere. Yeah, but my passions outside of education, or my interests outside of education, is definitely Te Kyle. I am I'm hugely passionate about the outdoors. When I'm not at work, you will find me hiking through the bush, at the beach, and dragging anyone along that I can, including the girls.
That is
So the outdoors is my happy place.
That is so cool, Karllie, to hear about your journey again. And I'm really curious, Karllie, you've had, different spaces you've sort of inhabited, and you've worked with people through different lenses, working in the different subjects, areas, so to speak. What got you really interested in sort of learning more about the neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches within education? What got you going with it? How did your journey start? And also tell us a bit about how you went about. What did that journey look like? Because often people are interested, they want to get going, and you kind of fumble around, and everybody has their own unique, I guess, journey to learning and embarking on this pathway. So what's it been for you?
Where to start? So obviously having worked in that pastoral space, I'm very passionate about that pastoral space. As a dean, if a dean was a full-time job, I'd go back to secondary education full-time, but unfortunately it's not. But yeah, I think my passion for supporting young people is probably where the interest comes from. But I guess my journey started when I attended, in terms of trauma-informed education, when I attended the Neuroscience and Trauma Conference in Christchurch a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I had started my master's in education by that point. I'd done, I think, one human development paper as part of that. So there was already a bit of an interest in neuroscience, especially the teenage brain. I have for a long time been really interested in resilience, where resilience comes from. As a dean, I was noticing over time how our young people were starting to become less resilient in certain areas, and just curious about what was happening and why is that happening. So resilience had always been sitting there in the background for a while. But yeah, that conference in particular, that's what introduced me to trauma-informed education. I hadn't heard that concept before. And what drew me to the conference was that I was already a big fan of Catherine Burkett. I'd heard her speak before, and I saw she was on the lineup. I had already read the book by Dr. Bruce Perry, The Boy That Was Raised as a Dog, and I saw he was going to be the keynote at the conference. What else? I read a lot. I'd read Matt Brown's book, She's Not Your Rehab, and I saw he was on the list. I'm like, there's all these cool people. I just, it looks like the place I need to be. So thankfully I managed to get down to that conference, and it just opened this whole new world to me. And I was like, this is just everything I learned that in that conference just made sense to everything, all my experience as an educator, what I had seen working, and then ideas that I was like, it just all came together for me. I was like, I need to know more about this. I need to learn, what I can. And so that, that sparked my journey. And then coming towards the end of I'd already decided that originally when I started my master's, I was going to do a thesis on resilience, something around teenagers and resilience. But I canned that idea at the end of 2021 after realizing that there was no way I could do a thesis and work full time in the role I was in. It just wasn't going to happen. So I was like, no, that's not going to work. So I ended up doing a couple more papers and deciding to do a literature review on trauma-informed education, which is the paper I've shared. Anyone who wants to read it. And all that's about is I just want I want all educators to know what this is and get on board. I just feel like it's just could be such a game changer for our young people in education, and not just our young people, our teachers, school communities. Yeah, I think I'm talking to the converted here, but yeah, I just want everyone to know. So yeah, so that I guess that was kind of my journey, and I still feel like I'm still really in my early stages of this journey because I haven't been in the classroom for a long time. Even though I'm working in education, kind of, it's not a space where I feel like I've been able to really go out and practice and influence yet.
Karllie, the influencing can happen in so many spaces and so many different ways. That's one thing I'm learning as I've sort of been going on the journey. And like you, I feel like I'm no expert. I still have a long way to go. I'm learning bit by bit, through others. And I don't read. I literally don't have a lot read, so I listen to a lot of the podcasts and interviews and things like that, and so I'm always sort of learning that way. And most importantly, I guess, learning through people's experiences, understanding how they are applying things in different spaces. So for me, the application has been personally for myself, healing myself and sort of bringing my best self as a parent, as a community advocate, as a early intervention specialist working with young children, families, and Kayako and ECE, and also in the space of I guess starting to understand how people, interact, respond around me, and how I then respond to them. And I think I've become so much more mindful. So there's so many elements, isn't it, where we can influence once we have this understanding. And I absolutely agree with you. Like, everybody needs to know about this because it really helps people personally, professionally, in so many different ways. So yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Karllie. Andrea, what about you? What got you sparked and interested in this space? How did your journey begin? And sort of, yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. I love Mark Twain's quote that says there are two most important days in your life. The first is the day that you're born, and the second is the day that you find out why. And I think that quote always speaks to me in such a beautiful way because the reason why I just remember when I was 16, at 16 years of age in Singapore, we had to sit our GCE O levels, and it was kind of like that crossroads of thinking about what you want to do in your life and where you want to head towards. And I just remember just having this really kind of quite a spiritual epiphany around, oh my gosh, I really want to do social work. I want to help the people who are disadvantaged. I want to be there and be the voice for those that don't have a voice. I want to empower those who feel powerless. And so at the age of 16, which is a very young age, I kind of saw this light, and it kind of like really kind of sparked something in my spirit and in my soul around this is the path that I want to take. And I won't review my age now, but looking back, I'm like still on this pathway to social work and still find so much meaning and purpose in what I do. So my journey kind of started in at the age of 16, where I then pursued my university degree in social work. And I actually did my basic bachelor's degree in social work in Singapore. And my sister was in New Zealand then, and she was having her first baby in Invercargill. And so she said, "Oh, you just finished uni. Why don't you come over and, give us a hand with the baby?" And I remember saying, "Yeah, I will come over, but I'm only going to come for 6 months because it's the working holiday visa. And I'm going back because I'm a city girl, and I'm not gonna live in Invercargill or Southland or any place like that." So, but life has a huge sense of irony because as I said, I'm living in Southland, but I'm also living on a farm. So, it's life kind of brings you on that journey. But I remember my first job that I had in social work was actually in a community organization in Invercargill. And, I was a new grad then, and I was about 22. And I just remember my first youth client that I had. She, came from a very complex, multi-generational trauma background. And I just remember whenever I picked her up from school and, she came into my car, she would come in and she would be opening the glove box. She'd be checking everything out. She'll be lifting all that kind of stuff. She was extremely, extremely hyper vigilant. And for me, at that point in time, as a 22-year-old, I was thinking, oh my gosh, my social work degree has not trained me to deal with anything with regards to behaviors. I was kind of feeling like out of my depth here. What do I do? This girl is obviously very unsafe. She feels unsafe. She feels hypervigilant. She's on edge all the time. What is going on here? So I kind of took on that lens of curiosity around, okay, how can I strengthen my practice? How can I bring in some therapeutic strategies to really support her brain and her nervous system in order to feel safe? So it kind of started my journey then around what is out there? What is out there around trauma? What is out there around attachment? What is out there around, really supporting children who have gone through adversity and who are living in toxic stress? What is out there? So I started kind of delving into the literature around attachment theory and really understanding that the child's experiences shapes who they are, the view of themselves, the view of the world, and from that they project their behaviors onto the people around them to test relationships, but to also test the internal working model. So I was in that organization for probably about 2 or 3 years. doing a lot of counseling, social work, really kind of grassroots levels, home visits, strengthening parents with their parenting. And then an opportunity came through Oranga Tamariki. So obviously they were called Child, Youth and Family then, where they were doing a pilot project on starting youth homes all around New Zealand. And straight away when I seen the advert, I was just like, yes, 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 that's me. I want to do it. I want to do it. And I just remember, I was probably about 28 at the time. And, that job was only part-time. So I actually took a risk and I quit my full-time job and I went to do that job. And so it was that job that it wasn't really a job. It was more, kind of like a way of being and a way of living in the residential group home with these youth who had already been in care from a very young age. And many of them had moved from placement to placement, lots of foster placements that were disrupted, that were, failed placements. Many of them had multiple diagnoses of ADHD, fetal alcohol syndrome, intellectual disability, attachment disorder, and we were dealing with what presented as so-called challenging behaviors. But the model that we were working on was a points and level system, which was based on just a purely behavioral model that if the youth showed respect to the staff, they would get points. If they showed that they could follow routines, they would get points. And as soon as they didn't, they would get bumped down the levels. And, it was a very, very limited system. So I worked in that home for 6 years. And as a social worker in the home, I really struggled internally because I knew intuitively that this was counterproductive. We were re-traumatizing our young people in that home with the practices that we use around punitive measures, around a points and level system that didn't help understand actually what was feeding that behavior, what was actually, the behavior was out here. And we know, many of us know that behavior is communication, but taking a step deeper is that behavior is actually an expression of the nervous system state. And so what we didn't take into consideration using that points and level system was, what has the child experienced to result in them being so triggered, to being dysregulated, to having a very fight and flight system, to constant being on edge and hypervigilant. And that behavior system and that model wasn't cutting it at all. So as a social worker, I kind of like, we really need to bring a practice change to this. We need to find a way to kind of change our way of working, change our way of practice, using a different lens. And I wanted to, so I was doing my master's at a point in time. So I thought, actually, I'm going to do a master's research on trauma and attachment and focusing it on group homes and children's experiences living in group homes. So, I don't know how this happened because often you don't get ethics approval to interview young people and hear their voices, but I was very, very blessed to have that door open for me. And so I got the research ethics approval to interview young people. So I went around New Zealand and I interviewed young people about their experiences living in the group home, what their experiences like with relationships and with staff members, what supported them while they were in the group home, what were barriers for them, what made things worse for them, what were triggering for them. So it was such a beautiful piece of research and it was so powerful, and I just think, if I could sum up my career being like one of the most kind of pivotal points of transformation in terms of my own growth, doing that piece of research. So based on that research, gathering the children's voices on their experiences, and then looking at the literature around what does trauma-informed practice tell us about kids who have experienced adversity and toxic stress, and what does attachment tell us, I developed a model known as the trauma responsive care model, and so it's published as a thesis, but also it's published as a journal article as well. And that became the model, which then was rolled out nationally in all the residences in New Zealand in 2015, which was such an honor. So I went around and I shared my research and the findings with all the staff and got them to kind of shift their mindset and their, kind of lens around from a behavioral lens of punishing children to actually understanding their experiences and how can I regulate the child's nervous system? How can I create that neuroception of safety? How can I help them to feel safe in my presence? And really that focus was on relationship and the relational connection. So yeah, so that's how my long story, but that's how my journey kind of
Amazing.
started. Yeah, and
Amazing.
yeah, so
And it is really interesting, isn't it? It is through our own lived experiences and interactions with others that we then start learning and growing ourselves. And that curiosity you mentioned, Andrea, is so important. And we all need to have that curiosity rather than judgment, so that we come from that space of compassion, space of willing to understand and get to know our children and individuals, and then sort of respond to them rather than judge and react
yeah,
to
absolutely.
them. So it's so important, isn't it? Oh, look, that's absolutely beautiful, amazing. Two such different sort of, ways and pathways of getting into it. But what I'm hearing, one of the things is both of you have this passion for working with youth. And it is a space actually that, I mean, even now with all the stuff that's happening in the education space, it's more so, I think, in the primary space rather than the secondary. And there's very few teachers, I think, in the secondary space that I know of who are really on this, journey. A lot of our network members are usually sort of working in that primary space. What do you think needs to happen differently, or why are things not moving along so much in that youth space as much as it is happening in that primary space? So why do you think secondary schools are still lagging behind in this, journey of becoming neuroscience and trauma informed in Aotearoa? What are your thoughts about it? Why do you think that might be the case?
I'll let you go, Karllie. You're currently in it. I'm a little bit out of the youth space at the moment, although I do have some adolescent clients I do therapy with, but and have tried to break down barriers in going into the secondary school space to do workshops, but haven't really been getting uptakes with that. So yeah, I'd love to hear from Karllie. Yeah.
Wondering where are those barriers? I do know one thing that stands out to me is the fact that secondary schools have different teachers for different subjects, and kids do move about, a lot across teachers. And so I'm aware that the relationship building, may not be as great as it can be, or the way it is in primary schools where, you spend more time with one teacher rather than sort of moving from, teacher to teacher. That's one thing I think about. But Karllie, what else do you think might be the challenges in that space? Oh, you're on mute.
Aroha mai. Yeah, that whole relationship thing I think is a pretty obvious one for secondary education. It's when you've got a teacher who's teaching 120, 150 kids possibly in one day, it is really hard as a teacher to build relationships. But I don't think it's impossible though, because we all know when we went to high school we had our favorite teachers and our not so favorite teachers. So yeah, I don't think it's impossible. Maybe not for every student to have a good relationship with every teacher, but I think if teachers, can make the effort on the relationship, there is a teacher for everyone in a high school. That moving between classrooms, every 45 minutes to an hour, you're moving spaces. That inconsistency is really hard for some of our young people. Yeah, which you know, you talk about with trauma-informed education, how schools can also cause trauma. I think a secondary school space, far more so than a primary space, can just be a really hard place for a young person to be in as well. But yeah, I don't know. For me, it all comes down to relationships. Yeah.
Probably the other thing that, you know, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about it. It comes down to relationships, and it's not just the relationship with teachers. Yes, that is sort of what impacts on the learning, but also there's the relationship with peers that would impact on that sense of safety, sense of identity, sense of belonging. You know, do I fit in? Am I accepted? Am I valued? Am I loved? You know, am I safe? All those questions. And I imagine that our secondary school students are probably asking those questions of themselves. You know, the nervous system is asking those questions of itself several times a day. And it's probably not very, you know, positive for them. Yeah,
Yeah, I
with the
think that
number
can
of
happen in
kids.
primary school as well. So, you know, with that peer safety. But yeah, I mean, high schools tend to be bigger and
Yes,
more chaotic,
yes, it's
which
true.
just adds so many more variables, I guess.
Mm,
I know I'm going to be very interested in Linda's time away, because I know she was
yes.
looking at secondary spaces and
Yeah,
yeah, her time overseas. So yeah, I am really interested to see where this goes in the secondary space. And you know, it is still a very new concept in secondary schools. I'm forever talking to secondary teachers and going, "Have you heard about trauma-informed education?" They're like, yeah. So then,
oh,
yeah, but yeah, there's yeah, just yeah, high schools just had a whole lot of
yeah,
other challenges that yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Frian, I wonder whether it's a case also of like, you know, sometimes you don't know what you don't know as well. Like,
Mm,
and I wonder if you know, there's such a wave going on, isn't it, at the moment with regards to people kind of yearning for this trauma-informed knowledge and wanting to, you know, gain the practice. And I just wonder whether we just continue to chip away and you know, just create the awareness and keep
mm,
spreading the messages around that. Because I think the one thing that really stood out for me when I was working in the youth home was that even though these children were chronological at the age of between 14 to 17, emotionally, they were not at their
yeah,
age. You know, many of them were even stuck at a 4 and 5 year old age
yeah,
because of, and I think without that knowledge of understanding how trauma impacts on the nervous system and brain, we
yes.
can often have very high expectations around behaviors and then inadvertently punish children for actually what they can't control because it's a nervous system reaction.
Mm,
It's you know, a expression of the nervous system in terms of, you know, that fight or flight or sensing danger in the classroom. And I think a lot of the key message I give to teachers when I deliver workshops is it's not about being safe. A child or student might absolutely be safe in the classroom, but
mm,
it's about feeling safe. So do they
yeah,
feel safe in their body? Do they feel safe relationally with you in the classroom? So I think those key messages need to, you know, yeah, I love it that there's so many people now who are spreading this message in unity. And I think the more that we have that, the more it will, you know, make the ripples and the waves that will bring transformation. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, I was quite amazed actually when I heard that the brain does not fully develop the, you know, cognitive functioning does not fully develop and sort of get wired well enough until you're about 25, 27 years of age. So it is quite interesting that we expect our teenagers to behave like mini adults when they don't have that cognitive functioning, executive functioning, to make good decisions, to organize, to plan.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so it is, isn't it? Because if
Yeah.
they look like little mini adults,
Yes.
I think, they should be able to function independently and, be well behaved and have good impulse control. And that's not the way sort of the brain is wired at all. So it's hard. And the funny thing is, I know this now. I've learned this, but still, when my teenager
It's different, isn't it?
not
We had to put into
organized
practice.
and impulsive, I'm like, oh, because it
Yeah.
triggers me, and then I have to like go, okay, this is about me. I have to regulate myself before I can, deal with that. So yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because that emotional contagion and being triggered by somebody else's emotions is something that happens to all of us, and
Yeah.
we've got to manage to regulate ourselves and regulate our nervous system first of all. So very interesting. Tell me a bit, Karllie, you've done the whole literature review. What were your sort of key highlights, takeaways, that sort of, your aha moments? And also, what gaps did you realize? I know, for me personally, when I've been sort of, on this journey and I've been trying to learn, one of the gaps I have found is there isn't enough information or research about neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches to do within the disability context, or even within that neurodivergent context. There's very little, and how that ongoing discrimination can cause trauma, that sort of stuff is just not there. And all the research, and this is something, this is sort of, something that I know because I talk to parents and I talk to, disabled people. And when we have those conversations, it always comes out and you say, yeah, this is what it is. But research doesn't show that, evidence doesn't show that. It's not been sort of really documented. At least I haven't found much to that effect. It always talks about how disabled people, neurodivergent people, people with lots of sensory sensitivities are at a higher risk of experiencing trauma, but not that, their life experiences, especially the negative discriminatory ones, can cause trauma for them. So I know that's a big gap. For you, when you did your literature review, what were the highlights and gaps, and what made sense to you, what stood out to you? Share a bit with us about that.
Yeah, it was oh gosh. I think one of the things that really, because I learned a lot about trauma-informed education on that journey, as I was reading the literature, and yeah, there was so much learning for me. I think one of the big things that really, I don't know, there was so many things. Understanding more about the, behaviorist theories and how it's, in Western countries and schools, in New Zealand especially, how much we've taken on board those in our education systems and our schools, and just reflecting on how that wasn't always such a good idea. There were a few good bits, but how schools cause trauma, which really had me reflect on my schooling experience. I was very fortunate to grow up with very little trauma in my life. Two parents who loved me, raised, great place to grow up, good friends. But I always use the experience of something that happened in school when I was 10 as a way of explaining how schools cause trauma, and that's my trauma experience. Was I had a teacher embarrass me in front of the class, and from that point on, I think it wasn't until my early 20s before I was ever able to get up again and speak to a group of people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I had this fear of public speaking. I avoided speeches right through high school somehow. I just, yeah. And I understand now that, I don't know, maybe it's my flight response. If someone had made me get up and do it, I probably would have froze. Yeah, just understanding what would have gone on in my brain if someone put me back in that position again. So yeah, getting, just recognizing how traumatizing school can be for some of our young people. And I think of one young student I've worked with who got a diagnosis for ADHD, if we're going to talk about neurodiverse and that sort of thing, during her kind of towards the end of her first year of high school, and how I don't even know how she did it, but she was literally surviving school big time. She had to go. She hated it. There's no learning happening. She was just trying to get through her day. And then to get that diagnosis was like, oh my gosh, there's not actually something wrong with me. I'm not a naughty kid. Like everyone had made me feel like I was. Yeah, and I could think, if school had been a different place for her, maybe it wouldn't have been so traumatizing, if she had experienced a trauma-informed approach to her time at school. Just what a difference it can make for those. Yeah, I guess, a lot of our minority groups, I think about our Māori students especially, in mainstream schools, our neurodiverse students, our LGBTQ community people. That was one of the big things. Something I was really interested in learning more about was the connection with neuroscience and mātauranga Māori, and that's one of the big gaps. There is very little out there, although I am very, like I said, I love reading books. Big fan of some really good work that's gone on with Linda Tuhiwai-Smith and Leonie Pihama. They've done some really good mahi in that space. So if anyone's not seen this book, I've only just started it, so I'm really excited to get my hands into that, myself into that. But yeah, I'm really keen to see more research in that space, and most of the research I did find is coming out of America and Australia. There is so much going on in those two countries. So it was really, I did try really hard to look outside those two places. There's still not a lot of research in New Zealand either. I found a few cool little research projects, but yeah, there's still a big gap in New Zealand. But yeah, I'm excited by the idea that I know there's other people interested in this space too, comparing the knowledge between Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge and Western science and neuroscience. And it was, I was just going to add, it was definitely Dr. Perry who really highlighted that to me when I went to that conference. One of the first things he said was what Indigenous people, or what Western science was learning now about neuroscience, the Indigenous people have known for a long time. So finding the similarities and differences when I do is really cool.
Nice.
But yeah, there's still a big gap there for me. So hoping to
really interesting that you mentioned this, the gap that exists over here around the links between mātauranga Māori and the Western sort of worldview perspectives that are coming through and the research that is coming through. And yeah, I feel really, really sort of, it's similar. There's that huge gap, disconnect in that disability space and the disability perspectives, experiences, and the links with sort of, the trauma informed space. It's really, really sort of wide. I was going to ask you, Karllie, you've done the literature review. Um, did you find any nuggets from here in New Zealand? Any bits and pieces that you think, are valuable for us to know about?
Probably not much in the research. So the reason that book got my attention is because I had found the report that they'd written from the research they'd done, which kind of was the big piece of work that I referred to in
Yeah.
my literature review. But probably the one nugget for me in that was learning about the concept that they, and I don't know if this is known throughout all Te Ao Māori, but they referred to trauma as patu ngākau. So ngākau is the emotional heart, and patu is like a strike or a club. So to strike the emotional heart is to harm it. And to have that term and then understand, so from a Western science perspective, it's all about the brain. But from a Māori perspective, it's more about the emotional heart. And then if you understand Te Wharatapa Whā, or a model similar to that, where we have the wairua, the himingaro, and tinana, a model I've learned that's a little bit different replaces whānau with ngākau. So maybe from a Māori perspective, based on what I learned in this bit of research, was that trauma comes from the emotional space, not the not the head space. And I just thought that was a really interesting, almost fits within that emotional space, because ngākau is the word for heart, but it's the emotional heart. We have manawa for the physical heart, but ngākau, so it sits within that emotional place as opposed to the brain place. So that was a really cool one.
Interesting. It's really interesting, Karllie. Thank you for sharing that. Andrea, what about you in terms of your I know you've done your thesis and you've worked a lot in the space closely with youth and adults in the space. What have your key learnings, nuggets, takeaways been for you as you've gone down this journey?
Yeah, so many, isn't it? But if I could sum it up to maybe two main ones, I think the first and most important thing is connection. Not only, so it starts off with, if you have a teacher in the classroom, it's about the connection with your own nervous system first. So if you can connect with your own nervous system and your own regulation, then you're able to be able to co-regulate the students in your class. So I think, just even in my therapy space, so I've after I finished off with the group home, I had my first baby, and after a year of maternity leave, I decided that actually I was going to practice what I preach and not abandon her and go back full time to work. So I started my own private work with that. And so even in my therapy, kind of settings and doing play therapy and doing counseling, it's all about how can I connect with my own nervous system first, so that then I can connect and regulate with the client in front of me in their dysregulation. So I think, when we think about the kind of key gold nuggets that I've taken away from my trauma-informed journey, I would say the first one is connection to your own nervous system, and then connection with the child's nervous system in front of you. But it always starts off with the ability for us to actually connect with our own states, to regulate our body, to connect with what is going on in terms of emotion, but also sensations in the body as well. So important to do that. And then we're able to then provide that co-regulation for the child. So, and I also love that, the quote that talks about, if trauma has occurred through relationships, then it's so important that healing also happens through relationships as well. So it's, I think it's, yeah, it's so important that often we hear it so much, isn't it? Relationships are so important, or build a rapport with the child, establish a connection first, and sometimes it can be kind of like throwaway comments and yeah, relationships so important, but it really is, because if we think about our biology, we are wired for relationship from the moment that we're born. We need another human being to actually keep us alive and to help us to survive. So when a child is being isolated, or they're sent away, or they're punished in their midst of activation, where they're actually experiencing a very scary, overwhelming flooding of their nervous system, and we are isolating them, or we're punishing them, or excluding them, then it only sends a message of abandonment, and it only sends a message of, I don't care about you, you're not important. And then what does that signal to their nervous system? What does that signal to their survival response? So I think
Yeah.
coming back to that, I think connection is also important.
Yes.
And then the second thing I think that I've taken away is neuroplasticity, that there is always hope, that no
Yeah.
matter how, a child has come in with a history of adversity or toxic stress, there is always hope. And I think neuroplasticity has given us the element of hope, that not only can the brain rewire, but the nervous system can rewire as well. And we can rewire their beliefs about themselves that would then, I guess, bring about a change in behavior. And it's just so incredible. And I've seen that so much in action around that rewiring and that possibility for change and hope.
Yeah.
So that's me.
I love what you mentioned. There is always hope. I think when we were having these conversations early on, when we were starting out with the formation of this network, the NATINA network, I remember we had lots and lots of korero around, should we use the term trauma or not? Is that negative? Is that what we're focusing on? And it was really important that we're focusing on the healing and thriving as well. We're not just talking about trauma and what has happened, or how negatively people are impacted, but also then what next? How do you heal? How do you embark on that journey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. I was listening to a podcast today actually, and I can't remember the person's name, sorry, but she's an author, and she actually was talking about how for the first 3 years of an infant's life, they actually don't need social connections and socialization. And she was talking about how the first 3 years are all about just attaching to that one key person, caregiver, person who is going to co-regulate them. Often it's a mother, but if it's not a mother, then it's, the next sort of, key attachment person. And without that attachment, good attachment in the first 3 years, she was talking about how then you have a nervous system that, is not functioning optimally, or isn't always, able to build relationships and attachments later on in life well enough. So yeah, so really, really interesting what she had to say. Look, I know you've shared about how much this has been useful for you in the spaces you've worked and things like that. Tell me a bit about in your personal spaces, how has this impacted you? What has this meant for you in your personal space as individuals? How has this journey and this learning impacted you? Either
I'll
of you
have a
can
go
go.
at this.
I'll let Karllie go because I've just talked.
I think I don't know, I've thought about this a lot because I've always been really good at keeping myself regulated, and I think that's just come from a good upbringing, and I had a good start like you talk about that 1,000 days, and I credit maybe my parents for doing a good job. But I think it's become, I'm now more aware of what I was already doing to be that person, and then also what I can do better when I need to. But just that, and obviously not just in my workspace, but just in life in general. When I'm sitting in that car and that driver in front of me annoys me, I want to beat the horn, and I realise, take a deep breath.
Yes.
I think I'm just more conscious of it. But anyone that knows me will tell you the girls know. They always back me up when I say to new girls, you'll never hear me raise my voice. That sort of thing. I'm just not that person. But I guess what I'm learning now is why I'm not that person, and understanding more about what's going on for me. In those moments when others might raise their voice, or I'm not saying that I don't, I don't sometimes. But I just be more conscious of myself, I think.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Andrea, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, like in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of you hear the word trauma a lot, and trauma informed this, trauma informed that, and I guess for me, it's not a fad, or it's not a something that's like a hype, or oh, everybody's doing that, so I'm gonna be doing that. I think for me, it's very much a journey, isn't it? And it's a continuous journey of commitment to this way of being. So it's more a way of being rather than a checklist or a PD. It's not a PD. It's not just a PD. It's a way of engaging with the world. It's a way of engaging with your nervous systems, a way of engaging with the nervous system of those around you, and in the community. So I was thinking about this, that I personally went through 3 phases. So the first was engaging. So I engaged with the learning, engaged with the PDs, I engaged with the reading and stuff like that. And then the next phase that I needed to do and move towards was embracing. So I started to embrace that way of practice and started to kind of shift my mindset around these children are not being naughty, they're actually dysregulated in their nervous system. So I started to embrace that practice and started to put into practice. And the third part, which obviously is still a journey for me, was really about embodying that trauma-informed practice. So it's about, as I said, way of being, it's living and breathing this. So, and this is something that I'm working on, especially in my own parenting, around how can I be a trauma-informed parent? How can I support my children in their midst of their dysregulation when they are having a sensory overload from after school? How can I apply everything that I've learned around trauma-informed practice into my own parenting, into the way that I do relationships around me? How do I embody that? So I think for me, it's a commitment, and it's a continual journey, because as soon as we think that we have arrived, that's, I think, when the danger happens. But we are continually, seeking out new information. There's more information coming out all the time around neuroscience and the nervous system. So we need to be on this pathway of, I need to keep learning. I need to keep being curious. I need to have that kind of the attitude around, this is a way of being, and I want to live and breathe this in everything I do. Yeah. So I know it's a big aspiration, but that's for me, that journey and that commitment around, am I going to, I love this saying that says, how you are affects what you do,
Yes.
and the action. So yeah.
Look, I can so relate with that, Andrea, what you've said, because sometimes I question myself and I think, oh my gosh, should I be working towards this, working in this space? Because I almost feel like when it comes to practicing, I don't always manage it. I fail. And then I go, oh, this is what I should have done. Afterwards, I'm thinking, in the moment, I'm not always able to practice it. But the times I have been able to practice, that Karllie, that self-awareness that you're talking about is so important, because it allows me to actually go, this worked. This is what I need to be doing more of, or this is, how I can keep going. So for me, it has been a huge part has been, with my own children, and supporting them. And when they are totally dysregulated, how do I sort of help them to co-regulate, alongside them? How am I their sort of, person that's supporting that regulation? And yeah, it's different for each child. So this is the other thing I've learned. I can't regulate all three of my children the same way. I've got success with this way for this child, and it doesn't work with the other child. They need something. Their nervous system needs something different,
Absolutely.
And,
Attunement, isn't it? It's
yeah,
attunement.
yes.
Yeah.
And I've worked with, I still remember this beautiful little boy I had worked with years ago, and he used to do this thing. He was a little autistic boy. He was absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And when he got upset and dysregulated, I couldn't go and hug him and calm him down like other kids. He needed space. But he needed space, and he needed me to be there watching him, like acknowledging that, you're there, you're upset. I acknowledge it, but I wasn't allowed to touch him, hold him, or even look at him. But he needed me there. The presence was something he needed. And so I had to sit there, and then slowly as time went by, he would let me look at him. And he'd be okay, like, okay, fine, you can look at me. And then when he was ready, he would come and sit on my lap, and then I could hug him. And that really had taught me how you've got to give time to our kids when they are dysregulated, and you've got to just be there for them in the way that they need. And I think for me, it's also a reminder, not only do different children need a different ways in which they can regulate, but also at different times they might need different ways in which they regulate. So what works one day may not work another day, depending on what's happening and what's going on for them. So there's so much complexity, isn't there, around disabled and neurodivergent children, especially when they're not able to express themselves, or they're not able to fully understand. They don't have that interoception awareness of what's happening, within them as well. And like you mentioned, the feelings and the sensations, not just the emotions, the actual body sensations, awareness of that and what that means. There's so much to it, to that self-awareness. And Karllie, I think it would be very interesting if you were to really analyze yourself, and go, I've managed to do this, not raise my voice, but these are the things that helped me to do that. Well, this is what was happening, for me, that allowed me to sort of remain in that regulated state. Yeah, there's so much that's happening when we're trying to regulate our children. Look,
I was just gonna,
yes,
sorry, I was just gonna
go
add,
ahead.
my son probably would have been very grateful if I'd known all this when he was younger. So my son's nearly 30, so
Oh,
if there was anyone that was going to dysregulate me, it would have been. He was, he was a good kid, but there's no one like your own children to push your buttons, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
That is so true.
yeah, I'm sure he would have appreciated it.
Karllie, can you tell us a bit about what are you finding? I know you've briefly talked about it, that gap in the mātauranga Māori space, and how trauma and healing is from the nakau in te ao Māori perspective compared to the Western sort of perspective, where it's seen as the brain. What else have you noticed in terms of your understanding of the Te Ao Māori world, and then all this Western worldview? How does it weave together for you personally? How do you make sense of it, and what sort of stands out to you?
Yeah, The first thing I think of is the whole concept around intergenerational trauma. And in Te Ao Māori, we've understood that for a long time. Understanding that, there's a lot that's passed down to us from our ancestors. So many things, and there's a lot of concepts that explain that. And then learning that there is now science, Western science with epigenetics, that is actually studying this stuff and going, well, actually, yeah, people can be born with trauma passed down through generations, and looking at that space and how, what Indigenous people already know about that. It's just really interesting to me, I think. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like this is not just for our Māori children and tamariki and rangatahi, but it just like Andrea said, it really comes back to relationships. And that is big in Te Ao Māori. For our Māori students in our mainstream schools, that's huge for them. And it's a system. They just like I said, I think it's all kids. They just need to know we care. And caring is as simple as getting their name right. As soon as a kid, I've had so many conversations with my Māori students about, as soon as they walk into a new class and the teacher, they don't have to get it right, but they've got to make an effort. No effort to try and get their name right. That teacher's lost them right there, and that relationship is going to be hard to come back for. It really is that simple. So kids just but kids do need to feel safe, not be safe, feel safe in those spaces. And I don't know, you might have heard this, but there's a pretty well-known concept out there that's what's good for Māori is good for everyone.
Absolutely.
And I think that's not because any of this is new. It's because we've known it for so long. We're just catching up.
I kind of I see a lot of similarities in that concept, Te Ao Māori concept of interconnectedness. And when I'm talking about interconnectedness, not just for people and relationships, not those connections only, interpersonal connections, but also with our environment, isn't it? With nature, there's so much of that. And I actually see a lot of links with that concept of neuroception, where neuroception happens, within your body, outside your environment, what's happening, what's going on, and all the interpersonal stuff, right? And so you're always scanning for that. And I think that sits really well alongside that concept of interconnectedness in Te Ao Māori. And if you feel interconnected, in a positive and safe way, then that neuroception is basically saying you're safe, you're doing well. And if that interconnectedness is not there for whatever reason and at whatever level, whether it's interpersonal, whether it's with the environment, then you will see those negative impacts on your nervous system. And if it is chronic, that's gonna, result in that trauma, I guess. So I kind of, and this is just my thinking, I see a lot of that similarities. I'm like I said, I haven't grown up here, so I didn't sort of have, any learning around Te Reo, Te Ao Māori. I only started understanding learning, when I came here some years ago, and when I was studying and things like that as a EC teacher. And I've picked up in bits and pieces, but that concept of interconnectedness for me within Te Ao Māori, I sort of, I love it, and I recognize it and acknowledge it as being really critical and important for the well-being of our people, our children, of all individuals, because if you feel that interconnectedness, you have that sense of belonging, the sense of safety, sense of acceptance, sense of inclusion, then you can thrive, isn't it? And then if you don't,
Yeah.
then you can't. So
And there's kind of two concepts there that come to mind when I think of the Te Ao Māori perspective on that. And the first one being whakapapa, which is why, that's why whakapapa is so important to us, because that tells us where we come from and where we belong,
yeah,
and gives us a really strong sense of identity.
yes,
So for many of our Māori kids, they don't have that, especially, many of our urban Māori, and not having that strong identity on who you are and where you come from. And then the other one is whakawhanaungatanga. And that's at a lower level, but when you have that, in a classroom, whakawhanaungatanga should be the very first thing that goes on in any classroom, because once the kids know who each other are and how each other,
yes,
what connections they can make, takes away the fear and the unknown, and they can start
yes,
relating with each other sooner. Like you said
yeah,
earlier, it's not just about the teacher, it's the peer relationship as well.
yeah,
And in order for kids to feel safe, they need to feel safe around each other. So
yes,
whakawhanaungatanga is the important concept within Te Ao Māori to
yeah.
help establish that.
That is so interesting. Thank you, Karllie. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know this is really personal for you, So thank you. Really, really do appreciate you sharing that. To wrap us up, what I want you to do is share a bit about what you're doing in your spaces and, where are you headed? I know, Karllie, you said, you're looking at a change, but you're going to be in education. But yeah, and what are your hopes? What are your sort of, dreams for the coming years for us, and for yourselves? In the space. Yeah, and any key projects, work streams you're working on. Would love to hear. Andrea, do you want to get going?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, so current work streams. I really believe I have ADHD because you won't be able to keep up what I do. My brain just goes all the time, and I'm 100 steps. Even my husband can't keep up with the amount of things that are on my plate, and personally, I can't even keep up with that myself. But one of the exciting kind of things that I'm doing at the moment is this Empowering the Village series. So it's a free webinar series that I've put on every month. So we started off a couple months ago, and the first topic I put out was a webinar run by myself on how do we support children going through big and scary stuff. So I had lots of people come on, which was great. The second webinar we ran was the link between gut health and mental health, by my friend and colleague, Tony Pakula, and that webinar is still available to watch if you're keen. And then next Monday, we're going to be having Zach Kim on. He's a registered social worker, and he's developed a program called the Smartphone Licensing Program. And it's a tool to help parents navigate the whole smartphone world, which thankfully I haven't gone into that myself yet. My kids are still quite little, but I've brought him on because in my work with Fano and children, the smartphone, there's so many issues now with regards to that, and how do we support children in a safe way, to navigate this kind of like big world around that. And then the following webinar, I'm gonna have an occupational therapist come on. Her name is Rebecca Bernard, and she's going to be talking about fussy or picky eaters and how we can support them. So really the whole purpose of the webinar is to equip the village with lots of skills, with lots of practical kind of knowledge and application and tools, so that they can then support the children that they care about. So that's one of the projects that I am involved in. I always kind of think of, I started my own private practice called Nurturing Relationships 2016, so that's coming up to 8 years now. And I guess when I first started it, it was kind of like fell into it, you know. I wanted to create space to have time for my daughter because she was only one then, but it's kind of evolved and grown over time. So I always think about my business as there's the width, and then there's the depth. So the depth is that therapy work that I do with my clients. So I have a caseload of about 15 clients that I work with, and I do a lot of trauma therapy or support them with traumatic grief. A lot of them have maybe lost a loved one or parent either through suicide or a traumatic death. So support them with that. Also do ACC sensitive claims as well. So support children and young people who have experienced sexual abuse too. So that's the depth, which I think is that one-on-one, the play therapy, supporting healing and restoration of the nervous system. And then I also think about my business as the width. So that is the workshops that I run, the trainings that I deliver for schools, been around lots of schools in Southland and Otago, and just really helping teachers to have an understanding of trauma, but also understanding of the nervous system and how that impacts on behavior in the classroom. And then lots of practical strategies on how you can support children in the classroom straight away with regulation, with co-regulation, with movement, with sensory modulation and stuff like that. So yeah, just think about my business as the width and the depth. So that's kind of like the main project at the moment is the Empowering the Village.
Amazing.
Yeah, and yeah,
Fabulous. Thank you, Andrea. And because we're recording it and then we'll put it up on a Facebook page, it'll be fabulous to have the links. And so then we can make sure the links are there available if people want to check out any of that. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Karllie, what about you? What are your next steps that you're excited about?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I know I mentioned, having not been in the classroom or in the school for a long time. That's not to say that I haven't put everything I know into practice with the girls in the hostel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they know everything there is to know about their brain now, and how their brain's working and what to do about it when it's not. So yeah, it has been good to have a small group to work alongside, and my staff as well. I have a team of about 10 staff as well, and bringing that into their everyday practice and that sort of thing. It is cool, and I know the girls pick it up. Sometimes I go, are they even paying attention? But yeah, they definitely do. I've had a parent say to me, one of the girls were anxious about something, and the parent said it's all right because she told me that you told her about box breathing, is the term she used, and she knows to do that if she's getting anxious again. So I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't call it box breathing, but yeah, I knew what she was talking about. And I think I shared, I think it might have been on the New Zealand Trauma Informed Educators group, but a picture of the whiteboard, and the girls are drawn all over it with some lovely messages.
Yes.
And in the corner it had the red brain, green brain, yellow brain, and little pictures of smiley faces. I'm like, yeah, they're paying attention. So yeah, so it's been cool to be able to have this group to be with me on my journey. But yeah, since that conference, I have really wanted to do the neurosequential training, Dr. Bruce Perry's training that I think Linda leads quite a bit of that work now. But I really want to do that, and having finished my master's now and moving into other spaces, I'm hoping to create an opportunity that I can do that.
Amazing.
So nothing's set in concrete at the moment, other than a bit of relief teaching, but an opportunity that I do have coming up, and I won't share the full details, but I could be moving into the primary space, which I never imagined. What does excite me about this is working with youth. There are times when you think, if only I got that child younger, it's like you said, it's never too late. but by the time we get them, you know, it's the work is so much harder. And and I think what a difference I could do with this, it's, you know, this knowledge and expertise when they're younger. And, you know, an opportunity has just presented itself, which just happens to be in the primary space. So you could end up seeing me, there somewhere.
Amazing.
It really is just to watch this space and see what happens. But it's amazing how doors open. But I'm just super keen to keep on with this work and like I said, sharing it with as many people as possible. And practicing it where I can, I guess.
Awesome. Look, good luck to you, ladies. Thank you for all the work you do in the spaces that you are in. It's so important changing hearts and minds, even if it is one at a time. I've learned to accept that this is a journey. This can be slow, but it's well worth sort of, carrying on with it. So thank you. And I think there's so much more impact we can have collectively. And this is why we're hoping that, if we can share stories of different NATINA members who are, doing things in their own spaces, different spaces, we can actually inspire others to embark on this journey and sort of, get going. So our kids have a good start in life, really, because we can shift so much if we started setting them up, with the tools to thrive with healing, so they can thrive and grow. And the first step, I think, is really acknowledging that trauma exists. We all experience trauma in different ways, and it's important for us to really understand what that means, how it impacts, and then start off with that journey of healing and prevention. So thank you for coming along. Really, really appreciate it. All your insights, all your perspectives, your time. Thank you very, very much. I will close us with a karakia, and then bid you all farewell. So until next month. Karakia whakamutunga. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapunui. Kia wātia, kia mama tēnā kau. Te tinana te wairua I te ara takata. Koiara e rongo. Whakairia ake ki runga. Kia tina, hui e, taiki e.
Kia
ora.
Thank you, Brian.
And thank you, Karllie, as well.
You too, Andrea. Hope we cross paths again.
Yeah. Hopefully in person, eh?
Yeah.